with several incidences of encroachment into Malaysian borders, land, sea and air. Is Malaysia in particular and Southeast Asia in general a field of geopolitical hegemony of superpowers, especially America and China? Malaysia faces intrusion of its borders in various forms. Smuggling, human trafficking, encroachment of foreign fishermen, terrorists from foreign countries and assassins, as well as of foreign air military operations. This does not include the theft of big national data aimed at sabotaging the economy and national security. The latest is the Air Force intrusion of the People's Republic of China, PLAAF. The country is in the midst discussing why the Malaysian government allowed Israeli intelligence planes to enter Malaysian airspace a few days ago, while the Chinese Air Force in less than a week carried out the intrusion in the Malaysian airspace by 16 Chinese military aircraft. Obviously, this incident is not in the accidental category. It's a well-planned operation with implications that lie ahead. The Malaysian Air Force, RMAF, itself detected the 16 suspicious aircraft in the airspace of MMZ, Malaysian Maritime Zone, and tried to intercept by contacting the planes to identify themselves but was ignored until the RMAF sent interceptor planes to visually identify Chinese planes conducting the intrusion. The short period of time when the country's airspace was entered by a non-civilian aircraft, an Israeli intelligence aircraft in the name of civil aviation regulations, and the deliberate intrusion of the Chinese Air Force without permission necessitates a detailed investigation. The region currently is indeed facing territorial disputes between several countries, including China over island claims and sea borders in the South China Sea. The incident of several occasions the Chinese Navy was in disputed waters prompted a response from the United States to emerge and pointed at China, alleging it of threatening regional stability. In any case, the ASEAN region is not free from the influence of external powers. In the name of defending peace and national interests, the superpowers seem to be preparing to turn it to become a battleground. That is why the recent incident of invasion of the country's airspace by the Chinese Air Force needs to be seen from the perspective of regional geopolitical dimensions, which include the question who wants to rule the region. While the United States has a military base in the Philippines and seeks to establish bilateral as well as multilateral military cooperation between the US and ASEAN countries, its main purpose is more to balance Chinese influence and maintain American defenses in the region. Malaysia is vulnerable to the geopolitical hegemony of America and China. Some ASEAN member countries are close to America and some are close to China. Security and economic relations are often the consideration. We are of the view that ASEAN, which is famous for its ZOFAN, Zone of Peace, Freedom and Neutrality, principles, but is no longer in practice. The bilateral relations and collaborations of each country with the great powers often set aside the principles. Relationships with great powers often put economic and security interests ahead of others. Criticizing what a superpower is doing is usually done through diplomatic channels. So if any public expression is to be issued, it is just to express concern, nothing more. That is how Israel's interests is related to the region. In ASEAN, Israeli embassies are in Myanmar, Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, Vietnam and Singapore, through the existence of strong ties between the US and Israel. Israel's interests in ASEAN are intertwined with American interests in the region. The military relationship between America and ASEAN will be taken into account by Israel, and for that reason, all 6 Israeli embassies in ASEAN are very active in conducting intelligence work through Israel's Mossad and the American CIA. With Israel's expansionist lust, the attitude of the 2 influential Muslim countries, Malaysia and Indonesia, will be monitored by Israel. Attempts to drag these two countries to recognize Israel through a normalization agreement will be pursued on an ongoing basis. Small and medium-sized countries in ASEAN have undergone major geostrategic changes after the Cold War era and the rise of China's influence. ASEAN countries have to choose between opposing China or side with Beijing and meanwhile adjusting relations with other superpowers. Choosing a dichotomy between colluding or balancing with America or China will be avoided by ASEAN countries. Usually economic considerations take precedence over others. Malaysia needs to be smart in mapping its position in the region's geostrategic policies. The ability to formulate a policy on diplomatic relations between China and the US should not only be considered by the government officials but should also take into account the sentiments of the people. Surely recognizing Israel is a red line that will not be compromised by the people. The attitude of underestimating and downplaying the potential threat will trap Malaysia in the cunning strategy of Israel and the geopolitics objectives of America and China.